Welcome into 12 News at 9. I'm Rachel Hackbarth. Tonight, questions from U.S. lawmakers, including Kansas Senator Jerry Moran. This is regarding flight safety, communication between aircraft, and policy surrounding helicopters and airplanes sharing the same airspace. This all comes after January's deadly flight 5342, which flew from Wichita to Washington, D.C. Cale Chapman listened in at that hearing and has the latest tonight.
Children lost their parents, husbands lost their wives, a Kansas couple lost their daughter, and a rural community in our state called Kiowa lost a husband and a wife.
The Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space Innovation, chaired by Kansas Senator Jerry Moran, examining the findings of the NTSB's preliminary report into the Flight 5342 crash.
This should never have happened. This collision was horrendous and it is heartbreaking, but it was not a surprise.
In their report, the NTSB says between October of 2021 and December of 2024, there were 15,000 near misses involving airplanes and helicopters at DCA. During the hearing, lawmakers questioned the Army after they shared that they fly missions around D.C. with NTSB out, the system that shares real-time position with air traffic control turned off.
So right now, today, the Army is flying helicopters in and around DCA Airport with NTSB out, turned off. Is that correct?
When conducting their Northcom directed mission, that is correct.
I have to say I find that shocking and deeply unacceptable. And I want to encourage the Army right now to revisit that policy and to revisit that policy today.
Now the subcommittee is looking to make sure changes are made to prevent future crashes and that those changes have a real impact.
There needs to be communication between these aircraft, and the FAA tells us today it's going to be required in most spaces at Ronald Reagan. We need to make certain that the follow-through is there and that the Army abides by those new rules.
In Wichita, Cale Chapman, 12 News.
Immediately after the preliminary report came out, the FAA made a rare move, making an immediate change. The agency closed a key helicopter route near Reagan National Airport that was in use at the time of that crash.